somebody who might have something to say about the Blue Jays and the state of their farm system, who can actually help them. Kiley McDaniel, ESPN, MLB Insider. Morning, buddy. Thanks for doing this. Great to have you back on.
Morning.
Hey,
how you guys doing?
We're doing all right. Except, you know what? I was just thinking before you came on how funny it is. Jeff Passan puts out a report with the Blue Jays still in the Shohei sweepstakes. It feels like they're down to being one of the 3 teams or one of the 4 teams. At least they're in the mix, right? And people here do not care because they do not believe. like nobody here, not one soul is preparing themselves for actually landing Shohei Ohtani. No matter how many people go, hey, they're dark horses or they're outsiders or whatever. It's just, we've been through this dance before, and it's amazing that a generational talent, the most exciting sweepstakes for a player that I can remember in baseball anyway, and Toronto's in it, but we don't feel that way at all. Like it's barely a point of discussion.
Do you think that's like the character of the city? Like I know in the States you heard a lot about like Philly and Buffalo and some of these places that are historically had always lost, and so they have this fatalistic approach to things, or you think it's just like because of the baseball team and how it's gone in the past, they're just like, oh, things aren't going to work out for this team?
I think it's the main selling point we keep hearing is Shohei can open himself up to a country. But then you remember that our entire country is like the population of New York or California. So you go, yeah, all right. Like he can just do that, but there. 2 is that the baseball team just isn't where it was supposed to be. Like they haven't won a playoff game with Bo and Vladdy. And so that's, I think, pretty important if we're talking about Shohei wanting to win. Why would he identify this team as these guys give me the great opportunity to win, unless there's something else, which is part of the secondary topics that I want to talk to you about today. And then, this is a market that, fatalistic-wise, there's a lot of always the bridesmaid here when it comes to free agents. Like when it comes to posting for players or, hey, they were actually in on this guy, there's always the report that comes out like a month after someone signs that, hey, Toronto was actually very active. They just weren't able to close the deal. And so I think it's all those things coming together that's causing the just complete pessimism from the fan base to believe that, there's no shot here.
Yeah, and I would have them as big underdogs. I don't think the fans are wrong to like not get their hopes up. I would say the Dodgers are huge favorites, and I would say Rangers, Cubs, Mariners, maybe Giants are also in the mix. Mm-hmm. So like the odds that Toronto comes up with them, I would say are 5 or 10%, like not very high.
But even that's
also pretty
that's
high
incredible.
For one of the best players in baseball.
Like if you told me 5 or 10% to get Shohei Ohtani, like last year, I would have said that's incredible. What happened? Did we win the World Series? Like that's what I would have thought.
The odds would say once 12 Ohtani level free agents hit the market, you will sign one of them.
Yeah. See, that's it. I would love those odds. Okay. So before we move into some of the prospects, because I do feel like if this team was to actually have a realistic shot at Shohei Ohtani, it would be with the implication of, don't worry, we're moving all in. Like we're making sure that there's other winning pieces around you, that you're joining a team that doesn't look exactly like this. But everybody keeps reporting about, hey, the Jays want to make a splash. The Jays want to do something big, right? Like Passan, Robert Murray, John Morosi, every single insider is coming out with this. What's your read on the Jays' splash desire? How are you interpreting that?
Well, I'll answer your question slightly differently. So my sort of background is in scouting, like high school and college players. And this time of year is the time of year that when I talk to scouts, we don't talk so much about players because it's sort of like they haven't really played in a few months. It's not really relevant for a few months. And so the thing they always bring up is, who's getting fired? Not because they want to see people fired, but because scouts get to advance when people get fired, spots come open, promotions are available, things like that. And so this time of year when I talk to a scout, they're always like, okay, what GMs are on the hot seats? Who's a maybe? Who might like to save their job for next year, get rid of their scouting director, like those sorts of questions. And I had a talk with a high-level executive last night, and we went through that exercise. And there's, 2 or 3 teams where it's like, if they don't have a good season, could be dumped in the middle of the year. Mm-hmm. The Blue Jays came up in the conversation because they've been spending a lot of money. They're in a really good division. They have some good players. They haven't been finding results. And it's not like they are like, say, like how Cleveland is with pitching, where it's like, they're really good at this one thing. You got to let them keep going. Or like the Yankees have been good until basically the last year or two. Give them 1 year to come back to it. And with the Blue Jays, like I can't really make that narrative where it's like, well, if they just had a little bit more money, or if this one guy didn't get hurt, or whatever it was, it's like I can't give you a clean answer as to how this like sort of resolves itself. That's not to say they can't sign Ohtani and win 100 games next year. That's obviously like on the table. But that's like, I think part of the problem is the narrative and I would even just say like the evaluation. Like, is the picking of the players with the farm system or the moves in free agency that like Gabby Moreno, Lourdes Gurriel for Varsho trade was like, one of the bigger moves last winter for the team, and like it didn't really work out that well. Like, it's fine, but like you probably would reverse that if you could. And so I think that's more the question. So then pivoting that into what your question was, do you think, ownership, the president, whatever the decision maker is for the payroll, do they think, oh, what this team needs is to really go for it, or we need to step outside of the idea of a payroll and just sign Ohtani and get like a global superstar? Is that what they think the solution will be to where they are? Or is it like some other teams where a guy's like maybe getting toward the hot seat where they sort of pare back spending and they're like, all right, let's see if you can do it, and then I'll give you money as you earn it.
Yeah.
Like, what direction do you think that will go? Because at this point, there's a lot of bluster and rumors and who has money and who doesn't. And it's about 50-50 guessing if it's actually real.
Yeah, I'm always dubious of it when it's always rival executives, which is a lot of these reports. It's rival executives say the Blue Jays want to see a big splash. I'm like, all right. Like, maybe some of that is they're talking to you about trades, but maybe some of it is just them recognizing and doing the exercise that you just did, and that a lot of us are doing, which is feeling
like... It could
like,
be cushioning the blow that when Ohtani signs, they get to leak that we were in second, and they think that that's a win and gets them an extension, because
then they do not know this market.
Sport.
Then they have Then actually, one of the big criticisms of Shapiro and Atkins here is that they've never really understood this baseball market, like the fan base, and that would be the ultimate. That would be the actual ultimate showing, is if they rolled that out to these fans, going, "We were in it." Everybody, yeah. Would you like to celebrate us out?
Second and Ohtani banner.
Yeah, exactly. And then just we're met with a chorus of boos, and then they walk back into the palace, and they're like, "What happened? We thought this was a huge win for us." Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. The other piece of it too, and I think a really important one for this team, is that they can't take the step backwards, and they do need something to reinvigorate the fan base, because it isn't great right now. They can't just come back with the same old, especially given that they've kept the same front office, because they've renovated the stadium, and it's not a new stadium, right? It's one of the like older, crappier ones in baseball, actually. But yeah, they've done a really good job at renovating the seats, and now they spent a ton of money. They don't want to have August come around and fans not show up to this place. Like, they need a packed house for the entirety of the season. And so, yeah, I do think that they're going to have the desire to do something big. It just becomes a question of what can they actually do if it's not the Hail Mary of Ohtani. And so that's why I want to talk to you today about the farm system, is because I just don't see a lot from the Major League roster that they can pull from that's going to make a ton of sense. Like, people like to do Vlad trades, and myself included, right? People keep doing like, hey, what would you do? Would you do Vladdy for Soto? And I'm like, I don't know, maybe, yeah. People like to do, is there a huge package that you would give up or to acquire Bo Bichette? And would the Blue Jays be in on something like that? And I don't see it. I just really don't understand how that works. And so I wanted to go through the farm system with you today and see if there are actual really attractive pieces so the Jays can do, for a lack of a better comparison, another Gabriel Moreno trade where they bring in, a long-term piece of this franchise for some prospects. So I'll just start with this. How do you view just like the overall depth of this organization's farm system? Because last year when I had you on around the same time, it was painting a bit of a bleak picture.
Yeah, I would say I'm like in the middle of doing the rankings that will come out in about 2 months, and where I ended last year, which is, pretty informed, like it's pretty close to what I'll end up having at the end. They're in like the 20 to 23 area, and I would say 2/3 roughly of that value, because for people who have followed my stuff before, the way I do it is essentially each player gets a dollar value, and then I add them all up. And the players in the top, like say 50 of the top 100 are where the, bulk of the value is. So like Ricky Tiedemann is going to be 15th or 20th or something like that on the list. And I think if you look at like, hey, are we going to add a starting pitcher? I think he's the starting pitcher they're going to add. I would guess Manoah gets traded. I would guess Tiedemann's in the rotation by midseason. I would guess that's sort of like the big addition. I don't think there's going to be like a Yamamoto level guy. When Tiedemann graduates, it will then be in the bottom 5, probably about 25th farm system. And you have Elvis Martinez also right there about to graduate. And so if he graduates, say, by the middle of the season, then it'll move down even further. Then it'll be bottom 3 or 4. And then it's like, okay, well, we'll need some guys to step up. We'll need a good draft class. We'll need an international class. Like, you kind of need some things to happen, because once you get in that bottom, if you're a big market contending team, it's kind of hard to get out of it, because like this happened with the Braves. They did some things right where they would draft a guy, he gets straight to the big leagues, or they would trade him for Sean Murphy, Matt Olson, whatever. And so basically guys are coming in and just immediately going out of the system one way or another, whether good or bad. And you can't get out of the bottom five because you're not picking high enough and you're not like adding guys at the deadline. And so if you're looking at that as sort of ammunition for how good can the team become, can we make a big trade? The answer's been like probably not for a little while. And now the two main guys, Tiedemann and Martinez, both may graduate this year. And then if those guys come up and are not immediately good, then their trade value deflates and they're not prospects anymore. And so then, as I'm saying, like the ammunition sort of backs up to where it is then Addison Barger's, nice extra guy. Brandon Barriera and Arjun Namala are pretty far off. You kind of need them to perform. Then it gets to be like, kind of extra guys would be how most teams would look at it.
Yeah. And see, this is why, again, this makes it so hard for me to see this, whatever the splash is outside the Ohtani Hail Mary, is you look at it and go, all right, well, Tiedemann has basically, the word has been forever, he's an untouchable guy for this organization. And you just said it, like he could have an impact on this team this year, right? So that means you're pulling from that 25 pool that you're talking about when trying to make a move like this. And that just makes it harder and harder and harder for me to believe that, yeah, they're actually going to be able to accomplish something where, yeah, they're not pulling from the major league roster. So last year, again, when I was speaking to you, Tiedemann's arm slot worried you. But he was dominant when he was healthy. And like that materialized immediately, right? Because he had a shoulder issue right away in spring. But yeah, the 45 innings that he did pitch were great. And by the sounds and like kind of reading between what you just said there about how high he is in your prospect rankings, I'm guessing though that like when you actually saw him pitch, the results maybe boosted his stock to you?
Yeah, the arm slot is not necessarily like a long-term concern or an injury concern. It is how is that going to play? In one way, the low arm slot means the fastball will play at the top of the zone. It also means he can probably throw a good changeup, but then is it coming in low enough that right-handers are going to hit off him? Like that's just sort of like the generic concern of guys that throw with that arm angle. And then obviously like him, having some injuries also makes you pause because he also was like a pretty generic like third round pick, wasn't even really a guy out of high school. And now he's still in his early 20s. So there's also usually a little bit of a pause when a guy goes from not very good to really, really good immediately. And his came with a velo bump, which is another thing where like injuries often become a factor when all of that happens very quickly. Can the body handle it? So I think there's a little bit of a consolidation. I think he will be fine. I think he's very similar to Kyle Harrison, who came up last year for San Francisco. Probably like a tier behind Yuri Perez, who came up with Miami. I wouldn't have like sort of rookie of the year expectations, but that's certainly, he'd be one of the 5 or 10 guys I would say that could do that. I would say expect him to be like a really good like third starter that you can slot in behind Gausman and Berrios. He'll kind of take that spot as Bassett, Kikuchi, those guys maybe recede into the background as they get into their mid-30s. I expect that. You'll probably get that. But it's not like I wouldn't expect you're going to get a frontline guy that's going to change everything. And, he's going to be starting the playoff game and game one in Toronto. Like that's not what you should really expect. That doesn't happen, but like once or twice every season or two. And I think Corbin Carroll and Gunnar Henderson might give people, sort of false expectations that that's kind of how this plays out.
Yeah, I think that's good perspective for everybody to have here, though. All right. So again, going back to last time you were on with me, we talked about Orelvis Martinez, and this was a year ago. You viewed him as like a boomer bust type prospects that was polarizing among some teams. Now, he made some changes to approach this season and goes up to AAA, has an 847 OPS and 250 plate appearances. How has his stock changed? Has it changed materially to you?
Not really. He's still a guy that his approach is sort of the thing holding him back. Or I guess you could say either approach or his contact in the zone. So he's probably not going to be like a 360, 370 on base guy. And the reason that becomes a concern is he's just okay defensively at third base. There's like sort of loft within the zone, so he's going to swing and miss in the zone some. The walks have crept up, which is good, but the strikeouts have also crept up, which then, that raises the concern that if things could go well, he could hit 260 with a 330 on base, 25 homers, and play a passable third base and, sort of take over for Matt Chapman, and all of this goes perfectly. But like that's kind of what you're excited about. If it doesn't go well, he comes up and a guy that maybe should run a 27% strikeout rate, which is right on the border where, things can work. And in short stints, when you bring him up, he's running a 35% strikeout rate, which we've seen with a lot of non-top 50 guys when they come up. Sometimes they're just terrible for 100 ABs and just, the game's a little too fast. They got to slow it down. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it never does. Sometimes they figure it out in the 200th AB. That's the concern with him. Does it come up and it's totally disastrous and you got to send him back down and it's like a slower process, or does he come up and immediately solve the problem? Which I would imagine is part of what Toronto's talking about when they're looking at bringing back Matt Chapman, or do we roll with Orelvis? What do we do? you'd love to have the problem of having too many good players, but also Matt Chapman's deal, you'd have to be paying, a retail rate for him going into age 35, 36. Like that also isn't going to work perfectly. So it's sort of like you've got to find an answer out of two not very good answers, even though the players are good. Like neither one of those is going to be like a slam dunk easy call, and you kind of got to pick one. You can't really go with both.
Yeah. For me, paying Matt Chapman the money that he is likely to command is just an impossibility for this team with some of the contracts that they have coming up. I don't
also take you out of the Ohtani conversation as well.
100%.
That important to the team.
100%. And but the other part of it is, the internal presentation is Orelvis, who just went over, and then the other guy is, what do you think of the idea that Addison Barger could be, the team's regular third baseman as of next year, or at least someone who plays a bunch of games there?
I think he certainly can be an important player. He's the correct side of the platoon that can play an emergency shortstop, pretty good second and third, can make contact, has a little pop. I think if you were to sort of mash together him and Schneider and Biggio and, Clement and Otto Lopez, it's Espinal, if throw all those guys together, there's probably a good platoon in there out of those guys.
So I think you can feel made fine a monster about of 6 guys. You're like, they could all combine all their best talents into one guy. They would be fine.
It's going to be a Voltron platoon third baseman. It's going to give you league average production. I don't know. I wouldn't bet on Berger being a guy that you're just sort of like, this guy's going to get 2 or 3 WAR. Yeah. He's going to be a slam dunk guy for the next 5 years. We'll be trying to extend him for the next couple of years. I don't think he's quite there, but I think he's a really good player. That's probably the best of that group. If I had to guess, I'd say him and Schneider are probably the 2 best guys. And also being lefty and righty, those 2 might be the platoon, and then Biggio's the bench bat, and Espinal's the utility infielder, and Lopez and Clement can kind of go in the background. I would guess that how it plays out. So having Orelvis and Barger, I think, gives you a little bit of confidence that you're like, all right, if one's terrible, the other one will be okay. And we still got 2 spots to fill, but Schneider was pretty good, and Biggio was okay. And that's what I mean. You don't feel great about any of those, but you got enough guys that are good enough. You've probably got an answer there. But it's probably going to be one of the weaker points of the team next year, and you can hope that maybe 2026 it'll be a stronger point because you will have figured it out, and those guys will have sort of blossomed into what they're going to become.
Yeah, just again, you have a lot of pressure on you don't have the luxury of, hey, don't worry, 2026. Not with this front office anyway, not with where this fan base is at. And so, you mentioned Davis Schneider. Spencer Horwitz, Bowden Francis. These are all guys that made an impact with the big league club last year, but do you view them as anything more than, depth platoon type pieces that you use in a pinch? Is there anybody in that group that you view as, hey, actually they have maybe a little bit more to offer? They could be a regular everyday guy.
Not really. I think those guys typically, I would say maybe one of them will have a regular season or 2 and then go back to being platoon guy, extra guy, bench
Davis
bat,
Schneider probably
player,
just had
whatever.
his.
Yeah, that's possible. That he's actually he's one of those guys where the numbers guys like him and the eyeball scouts don't like him. And so I think he'll be a bit of an interesting guy to see how it plays out and how people perceive it. And then also look at the StatCast numbers as even irresponsibly lucky. And so even though the numbers say he's good, none of the numbers guys actually think he's good. He's in that general area where it's just sort of that guy's probably not going to make an all-star team. So maybe don't plan on it, but he could be good for 3 years, which is definitely you'd be excited about having that guy at the league minimum for a while. It solves a lot of problems for you. But you probably want to plan on, we're going to pencil this guy, batting right behind Vladdy will be great. It's no, it's probably just an extra guy. But that also, bringing those guys up also answers a little bit, not emphatically, but answers a little bit the question of what's the point of view here? What is this team good at? Why, if you're the owner, do you want to give this regime $220 million to spend on the team? You need to be creating guys that were not high draft picks or, centerpieces of trades or whatever. You need to make guys out of nothing for me to justify it. That's why David Stearns is making, I'm going to guess, $8 or $10 million running the Mets, is because he was in charge of the Brewers, just like all these guys that have been in charge of the Rays have proven that they can have no money and make good players. And then you go give them money and they got to figure out a slightly different way to do it. But you would wish you'd have that core competency that this team will create players out of nothing, and 3rd-round picks will turn into core players, and first-rounders will always be a certain level of good, or at least they'll be traded before it turns out they're bad. That needs to be happening more often and at a higher level because, for better or worse, Bo Bichette, pretty high pick, Vlad Jr., the best guy in his class. You kind of have to be able to turn guys into that level of guy who weren't always expected to be that level of guy. And that's the kind of thing that gives you the margin to then have the money to spend on guys, because you have 5 dudes making the league minimum that, kind of weren't first-round picks. That's kind of what I'm going back to. Because if that was solved, and we knew Davis Schneider was a guy, and we knew Bowden Francis was a guy, then all of a sudden there's extra money to spend, and all of a sudden the holes you got to fill are not as important, and you can afford to take some risks in free agency, and you have some margin for error. And then this whole thing becomes easier, and we're not talking about, well, things don't work out this year, what happens to this regime? That conversation then changes.
Yeah, which is so crazy because, again, it was 2 years ago where we were having talks in the city about how we've never seen the Jays with as much optimism that was on the actual roster, the payroll, and the farm system all being in sync. And now all of a sudden it's like there's 2 years left of these two-star players, a lot of your free agent signings outside of Gossman. But yeah, it looks like it's money that's hurting you, at least at the price. Not that none of these guys can play, but just that the price is starting to hurt you. And yeah, that the farm system is in a position where you remove the top guy and they're 25th in all of baseball. So that brings me to this one then. And you, by the way, you are fully free to just say pass on this question, okay? Because who knows? And you said it, you're not all the way down going through the prospects, and I don't know how high this guy would have been for you anyways, and he's not a name that you mentioned. But I texted people before this interview asking, hey, who would you want to know about from Kiley? Who would you want to know about from Kiley? And the answer I got back from multiple people that cover this team and that know about this team was a guy named Alan Roden. Are you even familiar with his name?
I just bolded the name on my spreadsheet, and I was guessing that's who you were going to say.
Okay. So, all right. So then let's get into this. He's not a first-round pick. He's a third-round pick. He's 23 years old. Yep. He just had a good year. He walks a bunch, which is refreshing. I told that to my buddy Ben Ennis just now, and he was like, well, bring him up. We need this guy because he loves to walk so much. Somebody who I think gave them a lot more than they wanted, who is expected to go to AAA. But yeah, would you view would he be your choice as guy that maybe exceeds expectations or becomes the prospect household name this year?
So he was a guy out of Creighton in the draft. It was not a lot of tools, not a big profile, not even a guy that was good the summer before, but had huge walks, a great approach, made a lot of contact. But he's like left field, first base, DH, like not a lot of defensive value. It turns out that that sort of hit and approach translated into the lower to mid minors. And so now it's like, all right, this guy's definitely a big leaguer now. He's like at least that, like, latter day Matt Stairs bench bat. Like he's at least that. But I'm like looking at his advanced TrackMan stuff. The power still hasn't come yet. Now there are certain teams like, say, Baltimore, the Dodgers, where I keep coming back to this like core competency. If you can create league average power, 15 homers, 18 homers out of this guy, then that's a good everyday guy, because he's the kind of guy that might hit 280 with a 380 on base. And if you can hit 15 homers and play like a fringy left field, then that's a guy that's like starting on a playoff team. Maybe he's getting platoons, like, whatever. But like that's a good player that you normally have to spend $12 million on the free agent market to get. And you could get that guy for free and get him in the third round. This is exactly the guy we're talking about. As he is right now, he's a guy that'll, again, probably hit 280 with a good on base, but might hit like 8 or 10 homers. Like that's probably where he is right now if nothing changes, and he's already 23. But if there is an additional gear to be had there, which is what the best organizations do with this kind of guy, it's already a win that your third rounder is going to be a big leaguer that can hit and get on base. Like that's solid. But if you end up getting, say, Kevin Biggio as your third rounder, you're like, okay, like he's a big leaguer, he's useful, he's fine. It's good that we got somebody. Most teams get nobody in that round. But can he turn into that guy? And he's another guy. Him and David Schneider, I was actually talking to an analyst when I was doing some work on Toronto, and he brought up Roden and Schneider as like the two guys that like he was into, but he was like, I know some of our other guys are not into him, and those are the guys I'm kind of putting my bets on to see if that's who the guy is. And it's interesting that you then pair those guys with Brandon Barriera, high risk, high reward, big stuff, high octane high school pitcher, and Arjun Namala, maybe the highest risk, highest reward high school hitter of recent memory. It's interesting that a team that is taking these sort of like mid-major, not a lot of tools, performance guys in the later rounds, and then also taking the very traditional high upside, high tools upside guys in the first round. Like that's essentially the opposite kinds of players, which is interesting to me and suggests that there is some thought toward like what Oakland did a little while ago, where they were taking guys because they were like, if this guy at 6th overall, that's a high risk, high reward high school player, if he hits, he'll be a $200 million free agent. We can't afford that guy. So at 6th overall pick, we have to take that guy. Later in the draft, sure, we'll take whatever guy makes sense, all kinds of different dudes. But at the top of the draft, we have to take the guy that we can't afford, which is also interesting in the context of talking about Ohtani, is they're drafting guys as though they can't afford those guys. That's part of the reason I think that maybe Ohtani isn't really realistic. But yes, to answer your question, Roden and Schneider, I think, are the two sort of like, those are the two hopes from the from this point of view of, can we create players out of nothing? If those guys both turn into something, then that would be like a pretty emphatic into the yes column to sort of answer the question that I'm asking.
I like that you're only halfway through, only halfway We're looking through his prospects.
Well, if you were to ask somebody on the bottom half of the rankings,
I guess fine. But either way, this is very impressive. And hey, man, I appreciate you coming on because I always feel a lot smarter after you give us your insights. So thank you for doing this today.
Yeah, and I would also, while we're talking about all those sorts of guys, Adrian Pinto, second baseman, another guy like that. Lots of contacts, not a ton of tools. If he performs, keep an eye on him. He was acquired from Colorado. That was the other name I thought you were going to say because those are all in the same. That's the kind of guys that Cleveland signed. So just to give you one for the road.
Tough having the name Pinto and not thinking that's like that's not going to be a bust. Like it just feels like. But I'll buy.
I mean, he's not big. He packs a lot of fun.
Shocker! The Pinto isn't big.
No, we were talking Pinto Bean now.
Yeah, no, the car. But okay. So he's what? He didn't even come across my radar when preparing this. So yeah, this one's a shock to me.
Yeah, another little. I mean, it's actually the conversation I was having with that exec last night is that the Cleveland style of player, the little guy without a bunch of bat speed that makes a lot of contact and plays up the middle, that player is going a little bit out of vogue. I think more teams are looking for like the giant dude with bat speed that can like hit a bunch of home runs and light up Statcast. Mm-hmm. And so this is Roden and Schneider and Pinto. Those guys are all in that slightly older point of view. Obviously, some former Cleveland guys in this office. I think they're still approaching things that way, but trying to diversify some with, like I was saying, the Barriers and the Namalas and the Tiedemans and the Martinezes, that they're getting some of that other kind of guy too. Because I think if you're wholesale into one type of guy, I think you're probably in trouble. So it's good to at least diversifying at this point and seeing what works for them.
Okay. Well, I'm hoping that they can offer him in a trade for Juan Soto and say, hey, Kiley McDaniel said this is a player to look out for. So maybe
the last thing I'll leave you with is when Messi was brought into MLS because Apple and Adidas and all these companies got together.
Yeah.
Do you think there's something to be done with Tim Hortons and Ohtani? I'll just throw that out there. You can discuss that in the next segment.
Unfortunately, it's an American owned company now, so probably a tougher one. But maybe if they're still looking to keep the foothold here in the country. But yeah, that will be that. You know what? We'll spin that in the next one. Thanks for coming on, Kiley. Appreciate it, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Take care. Kiley McDaniel, ESPN MLB Insider.